were a good Old Testament-minded Jew living in Jesus' day, I wonder if you could have answered the question of Matthew 22 and verse 17. You have to put yourself in the place of the people asking the question and of you during their time. Could you have answered the Jews' question to Jesus in Matthew 22:17? Where they said, "Tell us therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not?" That was a very important question for the religious people during Jesus' day, because they felt that to be paying tribute to Caesar would be, in effect, a support of the Roman government, which it would have been, but a support more than just financially, a support ideologically, where you would support by means of your tribute or your taxes the pagan religious views that were held by the Romans. And we could say a whole lot about that one question when you put it in light of questions that could be raised today and questions that are being raised today, and people who are thinking along the same line as the Old Testament Jew, where they really had a problem. That is, the Old Testament-minded Jew, where they really had a problem with paying tribute unto Caesar. So they asked him, "What do you think about this question?" Which shows right away it was a question that was posed to a lot of people to find out what everyone thought about paying tribute to Caesar. What do you think about it? We've asked others. We have others' opinions. We've got the opinions of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Herodians, the lawyers, the scribes. What do you think about this question? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? Is it lawful to do it? Now, they were required to by law, but he means lawful spiritually. Is it okay with the Lord? Is it okay with our God? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, "Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me the tribute money." And they brought to him a piece of the tribute money, and he saith unto them, "Whose is this image and superscription?" And they say unto him, "Caesar's." Then saith he unto them, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." When they had heard these words, they marveled and left him, and they went their way.
Hallelujah.
Or what about the whole chapter here? The second half of Matthew 22 is composed of a series of questions that he's asked by the religious leaders. What about, let's see, down in verse 34. We're skipping over the doctrinal one of the resurrection. That's the one that comes in between these two. When the Pharisees had heard that he had put the Sadducees to silence, they were gathered together. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him, saying, "Master, which is the great commandment in the law?" And Jesus said unto him, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." Well, we really destroy the effectiveness of raising the questions by reading the answer that's already been given and provided for us. Because if we didn't have it, or you didn't have it in your Bible, could you have answered? The question being a good Old Testament-minded Jew living under that dispensation. Or what about, if you want to put yourself in the shoes of the Apostle Paul, then what about all of those questions that Paul gets asked over in 1 Corinthians? Putting yourself in the shoes of Paul, what would you have said? If someone wrote you a letter, a fellow believer wrote you a letter, and asked some questions concerning lawsuits. Is it okay to go to court and to sue? Because if you don't, you stand a very viable possibility of losing everything that you own, because someone's going to sue you if you don't take the initiative and sue them. What about 1 Corinthians 7, Could you have answered some of these questions about marriage and the relationship between the spouses? If they ask you, well, should men get married or should they not get married? Is it okay to get married? Is it okay not to get married? Verse 8, I say therefore to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them if they abide even as I. And if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it's better to marry than to burn. But unto the married I command, yet not I but the Lord, let not the wife depart from her husband. You're in Paul's shoes now, and you know your Old Testament, and you know what Deuteronomy 24, verses 1 to 4 have to say about divorce, that it is allowable. As long as you've got a bill of divorce, it's allowable. Then what are you going to say whenever the question gets brought up about divorce? Paul says, let not the wife depart from her husband. But if she depart, would you have had the wisdom to stick this in knowing people are going to do it anyway? Let her remain unmarried or be reconciled to her husband. Now you couldn't do that in the Old Testament, not be reconciled. And let not the husband put away his wife. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, then let him not put her away. The woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband, else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. Well, you can find out right now, in thinking back, whether or not, if you were in Paul's shoes, you could have given correct answers to these very important questions that were raised by the Corinthians, because there's probably a lot of people here that don't even understand what he's saying here in 1 Corinthians 7. So how could you give an answer and not even know what you're talking about? That's one way to find out, would you have given this answer when you don't even know how to explain the answer? Well, you couldn't have given an answer you don't know how to explain. Or what about those that were slaves during the first century? What would have been your recommendation, not being where you are now, but living then and being in his shoes, or just an ordinary Christian shoes, we could say, during the first century? What would have been your recommendation to a slave? Let's say that he was a Christian and had a non-Christian master. Or let's put both of them as believers. What would you have said to him? What about the dignity and value of work? This is what he goes on to talk about, some in chapter 7. Talking about the state in which one is called. Verse 22, he that is called in the Lord, being a slave, is the Lord's free man. So what's he saying by saying that? Likewise also he that is called, being free, is Christ's slave. What about verse 25? Now concerning virgins I have no commandment of the Lord, yet I give my judgment as one that hath obtained mercy of the Lord to be faithful. What about verse 32? But I would have you without carefulness, he that is unmarried, we're talking about virgins now, careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. Would this have been some of your statements? But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. There is a difference also between a wife and a virgin. And he goes on to explain some of that. Or what about verse 36? If any man think that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age, and need so require, let him do what he will, he sinneth not, let them marry. What in the world does that mean? That's not even Old Testament. That's not even Old Testament. But what does that mean? Who's the man that thinks that he behaves himself uncomely toward his virgin? Nevertheless, he that standeth steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but hath power over his own will, and hath so decreed in his heart that he will keep his virgin, then he doeth well. What does it sound? Sounds like slavery here. Someone's got a virgin, they're going to either keep her or let her go. So then he that giveth her in marriage doeth well, but he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better. Now is Paul saying that it's better not to marry than to marry? He that gives her in marriage is doing well, but he that keeps her from marriage is doing better than the one who's doing well. Then, in light of that, you might want to turn over to 1 Timothy chapter 4. The Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and the doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry. Forbidding to marry. Seeing something intrinsically evil in the marriage relationship. And if you don't already know, Paul wrote both of these passages that we're looking at, which I assume you do, 1 Corinthians 7 and 1 Timothy 4. So on one he says that to command not to marry, to have that as one's doctrine, is a doctrine of a demon, but yet in 1 Corinthians 7:38, to give in marriage you're okay, but to withhold from marriage you're far, far better. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, I thought we were talking about virgins who weren't married. She is at liberty to be married to whom she will, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she so abide after my judgment, and I think also that I have the Spirit of God. What about when we get down into chapter 8? If any man see thee, which has knowledge, verse 10, sit at meat in an idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols, and through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? Paul says there's nothing wrong with the meat, but what about your liberty in eating the meat whenever someone's around who doesn't have that type of liberty? What about the liberty that you have to receive or to not receive? The little goodies that are handed out at school during certain holiday seasons? Would it be sin to receive them, or would it cause someone to stumble nearby not to receive them? What about when you get a package in the mail that has little icons on it from a relative? The relative's going to ask you the next time they see you, how did you like what it was that they sent? Is there anything intrinsically wrong or evil with the little icon on the outfit or the little unchristian toy or whatever? Is there anything wrong in that? Should you keep it or should you get it away? Should you give it away? If you keep it, are you sinning because you're compromising your convictions? But if you give it away, you're causing someone else to stumble over something that's not essential in the final analysis anyway. I mean, this is the whole subject here of meat. Then you get over in chapter 10, he's talking about the same thing. Verse 27, if any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, if any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go. So here's someone who believes not, they ask you to some dinner and you go, whatsoever is set before you eat, asking no question for conscience sake. What if it's a little Valentine cookie that's been offered to you whenever you go? Oh, you thought we were going to deal with great theological questions. Well, these are little simple things, but what's the answer to it, though? Do you compromise your convictions when you eat it, or do you cause someone to stumble when you refuse it? Whatsoever is set before you eat, asking no question for conscience sake. He goes on the end of verse 28, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Does that little Cupid on the cookie belong to the Lord anyway? The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Whether therefore ye eat, verse 31, or drink, or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. So what about all of these questions here in 1 Corinthians? You know, it's a whole epistle dealing with a series of questions. Another one comes to mind over in chapter 15 and verse 29. Else what shall they do which are baptized for the dead? If the dead rise not at all, why are they then baptized for the dead? What does this mean, to be baptized for the dead? Are they dead spiritually? Are they dead literally? Are you counting them as being dead? Are they on their deathbed? Is it literal baptism? He doesn't even answer, and he just slips that in as part of a comment on resurrection. So there's a whole lot that's covered right here in 1 Corinthians. What about over in 1 Timothy 5? In verse 9. What should your attitude be toward a widow? Let not a widow be taken into the number under 80 years old, having been the wife of one man. But the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry. Well, is it wrong to remarry? Widows, that means the husband's died. We're not talking about divorce now. Having damnation because they've cast off their first faith. Withal, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers, busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. I will therefore that the younger women marry. What if you married when you were 19 and your husband died when you were 20? Bear children and you had no children. What are you supposed to do for the rest of your life? Are you supposed to work? What about women not working? Guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully, for some are already turned aside after Satan. If any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. Then he goes into some other things that we don't want to get into. Well, we won't take a poll on who wants to put in your question from a certain passage, but I'm sure we could all think up our own. I'm just showing you some that are some of the obvious ones, some of the interesting ones that have been raised by people that are raised in the Word of God, and some of them answered, and some of them not so much as dealt with, like 1 Corinthians 15 and verse 39. So, what I'm trying to say is that we're no longer going to have to say, hang in there, Friday's coming, because Friday is here. We're going to start studying Christian ethics this morning. So, remember what I just said. We're going to start studying Christian ethics. So don't get mad at me if 2 months from now I haven't gotten to all of your favorite questions by then. Because I'll probably just be taking my first breath around that time. Which means I'm at least not like the pastor of whom it was said that he could say more in a minute than most people can say in an hour. I don't know that that's really so helpful. Unless maybe you're talking on Mall Bell long distance or something, and it'd be good to be able to say more in a minute than it takes most people to say in an hour, but I don't know that's really helpful to be able to say more in a minute than most people can say in an hour, because you end up oversimplifying things to such a point you end up with nothing then. Amen. You have to reduce things to its bare essence so far that you end up with no truth, no doctrine, no point to what you're saying, because you've gone so far in trying to sum everything up and not hold the people past Super Bowl time on Sunday afternoon. So we're going to start, and I don't know how long we'll be on it. I've got a lot to say on it. There's a lot to be said on it. We could probably sum all of it up maybe in 25 messages or something like that, but it'll probably be quite a bit more than that. It is so involved and so long and so detailed, I haven't even attempted to get an outline. It'd be like having to write a book just to write an outline for our labors in ethics unless I was to simplify everything and never give you all the points that we have on the other outlines. So I'll be giving you some generalizations as we go along, and maybe you can form your own outline. But there are so many things to look at, there are so many things to study, that, as I say, it would probably end up being a small little manual, a small little book, just for your outline. And then it'd be probably so much detail, it wouldn't be useful to you because you could hardly find what you're looking for. You'd have to have a table of contents and everything just to find what you're looking for. So I'm not trying to make excuses for not having an outline. I'm just saying that it's so long we probably really don't need one here. There's so much to cover, so much to look at, so many questions to raise and have answered from the Word, so many passages to look at, so many statistics to give, so many studies to look at, so many other opinions to take into consideration, that it would just go on and on and on, and all you'd have is a lot of pages filled with a lot of little abbreviated notes that you might not know what they were saying. So in ethics, we're going to be looking at a lot of different things. Maybe we can just kind of start off by showing you some of the things that are interesting subjects in asking ourselves, what, if anything, does the Bible have to say on things like funerals? What does the Bible have to say about funerals? The proper method of disposing, we use the word not in ridicule of the dead person, but of disposing of the dead person. What's the proper way to dispose of them? Is cremation an acceptable alternative to the traditional procedure of burial? Is it acceptable for the world? A second question would be, is it acceptable for the Christian? What about attending a funeral? Are there demons active and present at funerals? You open yourself up to oppression by spirits to go. Didn't Jesus say, don't even go to the funeral of your father? But did he not go to a funeral or two himself in the Gospels? On many occasions you'll find out as you think deeper. If you don't think deeper, then you just believe what every wind of doctrine has to say. But on so many occasions, if you think deeper, there's almost always an alleged contradiction to whatever your position is. Almost always. Probably always. I could probably take the word almost out of there and it would still be true. Probably always there's going to be an alleged contradiction, either in principle or in teaching from the Word, to what you hold about a certain idea or a certain position. What about the now popular subject of euthanasia? Is it valid for a Christian? They refer to it as death with dignity now, or rational suicide. Is there any such thing as rational suicide? People in the Word of God have taken their own life. And what was the outcome of people like that? What about over in 1 Samuel, whenever we see Saul talking to, well, who was it or what was it? A demon? Samuel? What about death? What does the Bible have to say about death and the afterlife? What about the question of abortion? Do you have the biblical answer to abortion in your mind so that it can be explained to others? What about the subject of contraception, either inside or outside of marriage? Is there any difference between natural and artificial contraceptive means and methods? Is there any difference? Besides, one being natural and the other being non-natural or artificial, is there any difference between these different types of contraception? Society wants to pass blue laws. What about service in the armed forces? Are you straight in your mind on proper Christian recreation and entertainment? Or is there any such thing? I mean, just when I mention something, I'm not condoning it and I'm not criticizing it. I'm just using it as an example of things that have proposed questions in the minds of most people. Proper recreation and entertainment. Do you and your family know how to involve yourself in proper recreation and entertainment? The subject of raising one's children ought to be something that everyone is concerned about. The managing of your finances, does the faith message inform you that you're just to claim all of your needs abundantly met and the desires of your heart as well, and just spend the money as it comes in for whatever you desire, whatever the need is right there at that moment, without taking into consideration some things in the future that you might need your money for? What is your belief about what Proverbs says, that a righteous man lays up an inheritance for his children's children? What about that for a charismatic, faith-believing Christian? Oh, everybody tries to leave a little nest egg for little Johnny or little Susie, but we're not talking about everyone. We're talking about you as a charismatic Christian. Leave an inheritance for your children's children. That means you've got enough money left over. And what were you storing it all up for then? I thought that was a sin to store up money for a rainy day. Or at least it manifests a lack of faith, which is the same as being sin. Because whatever is not of faith is sin, Romans 14:23. Does that manifest a lack of faith to have a lot of finances saved up, stored away? Is it for you? Is it for someone who lives after you? Or is that going to be the same as confessing your own death? To say that you're saving up so you can give an inheritance to your children's children. Another big matter is vocational employment. Vocational employment. What jobs, what types of jobs? Not only just what jobs in general, but what types of jobs? Can we classify jobs or vocations, your employment, in such a way as to make a distinction between what would be proper for a charismatic Christian and what would simply be unacceptable, without pointing to this job and that job and giving us them by name, but making some characteristics that would be available for all the jobs underneath that category that would show them either to be a Christian type of employment or an unchristian type of employment. Your mind ought to be changed as we study that about your line of work, what your thoughts are about it, because there's hardly anyone that has any truth today about their vocation or their employment. All they look at it as is a job. It's generally not spoken of as a vocation anymore. Or your occupation, it's a job. They shorten it to job that you get paid for. You get paid for it so you can pay your bills. Seems like John Calvin had something more to say about it than just that. What about athletics? Is not the spirit of competition the spirit of this world? And therefore to engage in any type of athletics where competition is involved would be to manifest the spirit of this world, which takes into account just about every form of athletics, because athletics, by definition, you are playing a game, competing against someone else. You don't all go out on the field and try to all win and say, well, I hope we can all win this game together. No. You go out there to defeat someone. What about just out in the backyard shooting basketball? Are you shooting so that you'll lose? No. You're shooting so that in competition against someone else so that you can beat them. Is that manifesting the Christian spirit? You think about these things. That takes into account any type of athletics that you're going to be involved in. Does that really manifest the Christian spirit? To be involved, because, I mean, you're not really playing. You're not really involved if you're playing with the purpose of losing. And no one likes to win whenever they know that the other person allowed them to win. It makes it no fun then, so you might as well not play then. And we're not just trying to talk around in circles about deeper life in the spirit or something. We're talking about the spirit of competition, where you are competing against someone else. Is that any different from you doing your best at work, competing, doing your best at work so that you don't get fired, but someone else does? They're going to fire someone, and they're going to fire whoever's doing the worst on the job. Now, when you ask that, then you see it tends to sway your belief about it, maybe athletics in another direction. Well, what about backyard volleyball and badminton? You play those games to win. And what about all of Paul's statements about running the race to win? He's using athletics in many of his examples, and he's always striving to win. Not that he's playing volleyball, but whatever he's talking about, he's doing it to win. I don't know, have you ever thought of that before?
Amen.
Have you ever thought about that before? And it doesn't have to be a real knockout, vicious game that you're playing. It can be tiddlywinks. But you're playing it so you're going to beat somebody else. Can you imagine Jesus playing a game so he could beat someone else and make himself look better than them? Is that what it's all about? What are we going to do in just mentioning these things? We're going to cause problems in your mind the next time you attempt to do some of these things. Because we're not saying now whether it's right or wrong. But you're going to think then, and evidently some of you already have. You're going to think then about some of these things. What about outdoor hunting and fishing and trapping? Didn't the Bible say that we were to have dominion and authority over all of the earth? But yet when you really get the overcoming message of, well, take Isaiah 11, for example, in your heart, where God's going to restore the earth to such a degree that the lion is going to lay down with the ox, the leopard with the cow. If that's what is our perspective that's going to take place in the very near future, could you really, that big, beautiful, brown-eyed doe, put a slug right through her neck? I was out hiking the other day, and I came across one. Oh, she was pretty. I was up in the mountains doing some hiking, and she just came out of nowhere. Big, big, beautiful doe. Oh, and good, easy shotgun range, not even rifle range there, good shotgun range. And then I went on past her, and then I saw a squirrel chattering overhead, and evidently he hadn't seen too many humans up there in the mountains because he didn't know enough to flee. And after that, big grouse jumped up out of the weeds beside me. Never saw that one, I just heard her jump up. But could you really put a nasty old barbed hook in the mouth of a precious little fish swimming around out there in the water? And then when you take it in the boat, do you have any heart? Do you look into the eye of the little thing? Don't do it, because you'll throw them all away and you'll lose your meal. No, if you're not going to get these answers before we get to them, then if you catch fish, don't look at their eye. If you shoot that deer, don't go over and look at her and pet her. Let someone else go skin her, and you take it to someone else, let them butcher her up, and then you'll never have to see the little, well, large, innocent, beautiful creature that was just slaughtered, gunned down.
Amen.
And most states try to set regulations by saying, we're not going to let you rule the animal kingdom like Genesis said that you would. We're going to let you have 5 of those this year, and you can have 5 of them next year. Who do you obey? Who can you disobey? Well, let's move on. What about most games? What about most games that are found at most stores for your children? What about games or toys at all for your children? Jesus didn't play with little cars when he was growing up. There were other things to be done. besides playing with Peter Pan or Mickey Mouse or something? What about, I think I've mentioned this before, some of these things aren't here, I'm just thinking of them as we're going along. What should your attitude be toward, how can I sum it all up and cover everything? I guess the word shopping comes to mind to sum a lot of things up. I'm thinking of all types of different stores. I guess I'm particularly thinking of America's supermarkets. What should your thoughts, what should your attitude be in going in a place like that? Or is it valid for a Christian to visit such a fairyland of food as a typical American supermarket? What about dieting? Is it a Christian thing to diet? To diet. People go on carbohydrates diet or a calorie diet, or there are just 101 different types of diets. Are diets not inspired by evil spirits for people to get involved in them in the first place? But then again, what about if you don't diet and you get too big? And what does the Bible say about being too big? I was fixing to say, does the Bible just say, cut off any that's extra there? That'd be awfully painful. Because you got a bone in your arm, and there's way too much on the outside covering up the bone. So what do? Just run it through a grinder and take off about an inch on all sides? You know, the circle of your arm. Take off about an inch or two on all sides, and, well, you'd bleed to death. What are you supposed to do? Just stop eating? You'll pass out after a while if you stop eating. What about eating habits? When should you eat? What should you eat? What about the subject of dating and marriage? Divorce and remarriage? What should your position be toward race relations? Politics, voting, stocks, bonds, real estate. You know what it is to buy a stock and a bond. Is it not the same thing to buy real estate when it goes up in price and you make money off of something that you didn't do? You can buy a piece of property now, just get it on the outskirts of a city, and 10 years from now it'll probably be in downtown in that city. The price would have gone up very high very quickly. In other words, we're talking about investments, any type of investments, stocks, bonds, real estate, investments. Are they Christian or not? What about savings accounts, checking accounts, and so forth at your local bank? What do you know about that long, long number that's down at the bottom of your check? Is that not going to somehow, the checking system, the financial monetary system of this country with all of its digits and numbers, is that not somehow going to have some role to play in Antichrist taking over the world? Numbers. Everything today is reduced to numbers. Right. Everything is reduced to numbers. And the area where numbers are dealt with most of all is the monetary system of the world. That which deals with money. That's where numbers are dealt with. Or what about a savings account? When you can easily, or any other type of account, you can put it in a CD. If you've got $5,000 and you put it in a 12-month or 24-month CD, and whenever the CD matures and you get your $5,000 back, plus you get a lot more back, and you could give that to the poor or help the elderly or give it to the church or just spend it on some of your own needs. What about the scriptural validity of such things as that? Possession of credit cards. What about proper dress and adornment? Do you dress in such a way that it glorifies God even when you're at home when no one sees you? When you're out in the backyard and maybe only your unchristian neighbors can see you. Maybe that's where it's most important, where unbelievers see the apparel that you wear. What does that show about you? What does it show about your beliefs? What about the Industrial Revolution? What about partaking of alcoholic beverages? Is it a sin in Scripture to drink wine? Maybe for a meal one night. If it's not, then is there any difference between drinking wine for a meal at night and having a beer with some cheese and crackers? If there is a difference, tell me what it is. And if there is no difference, then can we take it on to vodka, whiskey, hard liquor? An alcoholic beverage is an alcoholic beverage. It may have 5% alcohol in it. It may be 90 proof. It may be some old watered-down Boone's Farm strawberry wine. Or it may be some really strong, hard liquor. Now, we know one of them's strong, one of them's weak, but the point is they both have alcohol in them. Is there anything else that you are drinking or eating that's got something that's similar to this in it? What about the Christian view of watching and owning a television set, reading the newspaper? Is this not reading through the eyes of the spirit of this world, looking through the eyes of the spirit of this world? To watch TV, to read a newspaper, to read a magazine, to listen to the radio. What should you be doing if you're on the job and there's a blaring radio in the background playing a lot of rock and roll or sad, moaning and groaning country music? It is so damaging to one's mind, you can't help but be humming those songs if you don't watch out as you leave from there, or they come to your mind later on. It's so damaging. Is it not just better to quit a job over something as small and as seemingly insignificant as the radio in the background? Radio can be very, very damaging. Puts thoughts and tunes and ideas into your mind, as well as TV and a lot of other things. But I'm just thinking about on the job, where a lot of places where you got a lot of men working together, they got an old radio blaring in the background. Just over and over and over playing the music. What about the Industrial Revolution? What about the question of sex, both in and outside of marriage? What's sexually valid for a Christian inside of marriage? What should his attitude be and his habits be toward it? Should you follow the gossip columnists and be a once-a-week person, or should it be a twice-a-year person, or should it be a once-a-child person? The marriage relation and experience is to bring about children. So is there any purpose based on the Word of God for it outside of that of producing after your kind? Isn't that what the whole animal and plant kingdom is for out there? They produce, they are involved sexually with one another to fulfill Genesis 1, to produce after their kind. That's the only purpose for it, is to produce after their kind. Now, maybe a female animal is not at the proper time of the year. Generally, it's a whole year for animals, not just a month. Maybe the female animal's not at the proper time of the year. Maybe the male doesn't know it, but at least he thinks that she is. And that's why the experience occurs. So no matter how you look at it, sex in the animal kingdom, and we're not talking about them being married or not, we're just talking about sex in the animal kingdom is to fulfill Genesis 1, to produce after their kind. We talked about attending a funeral. What about attending someone else's wedding? When a lot of unchristian things are performed and said and done at your typical wedding today in the typical denominational church. So in all of these things that we've said thus far, you can see that we're not dealing at all with any great theological questions. We haven't even mentioned it. Those don't even occur here. All of these things have to do with where you are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're not going to be confronting theology 24 hours a day, but you're going to be confronting these things all the time. All the time. Which is just one thing that shows how important a study in this area is and how important it is that you come to biblical solutions to these problems in your mind and answers to these questions that you've had before, or that you've got now as a result of this morning, or that you'll have over the next few weeks and months and years as we start taking our time to look through this whole area of Christian ethics.
For the